Bonjour, tout d'abord bonjour à toutes et à tous. Avant d'entrer dans le cœur du sujet qui va nous occuper les 3 prochains jours et de vous proposer à 3 voix une introduction qui va revenir sur le propos même de ce colloque, intitulé donc « Entretenir la présence du prince, la gestion des sites royaux 14e, 19e siècle, Maintaining the presence of the prince, management of royal geographies, 14th, 19th centuries », il nous a semblé important de revenir sur ses origines et tout d'abord de mentionner qu'il s'agit d'un projet porté et développé à 3. Eloy Hortal-Munoz de l'Université Rey Juan Carlos de Madrid, Merlin Hurts de l'Université d'Utrecht et moi-même du Centre de recherche du Château de Versailles. Cela explique que cette introduction se fasse à 3 voix et en 2 langues, français et anglais, à l'image d'ailleurs des communications à venir. Cela ne vous aura pas échappé à la lecture du programme. Bilinguisme qui témoigne d'ailleurs de la dimension résolument internationale du colloque. Ces journées sont donc le fruit d'une association ayant eu pour objectif de mêler et confronter idées, conceptions, mais aussi spécialités et périodes différentes, le tout, et je tiens à le souligner aujourd'hui, dans une entente et une bonne humeur. Et je tiens à profiter de l'occasion pour dire publiquement tout le plaisir que j'ai eu à travailler avec Merlin et Eloy et à la conception et la préparation de ce colloque. Merci à vous deux. Vous dire enfin aussi, pour terminer ce préambule, que nous sommes tous 3, et Mathieu se joint à nous, il l'a dit, très heureux qu'il ait été possible que nous nous réunissions ici à Versailles, en présentiel, mais aussi à distance, via Zoom, via la vidéoconférence. Ce format hybride permettant ainsi, malgré un contexte sanitaire qui reste compliqué et qui a pu nous faire craindre le pire, j'avoue, pendant un certain moment, nous permet en tout cas un aboutissement heureux à ce projet, dont l'idée a été lancée, c'est vrai, il y a maintenant presque 2 ans, à l'issue d'un autre colloque qui s'est déroulé, lui, à Utrecht, les 8 et 9 novembre 2019, et qui s'intitulait « Building the Presence of the Prince ». Et je cède la parole à Merlin pour nous en parler.
Merci beaucoup, Benjamin. Je continue en anglais. Let's wait for the PowerPoint. These are the conferences already. This is conference already was spoken about. We organized it 2 years ago in Utrecht, and it had a different theme. It was about building the presence, so not much about maintaining. So this current conference is only a logical next step, so to speak. And we focused on the institutions. And if I can have the next slide. One of the problems for the court was that they had a lot of buildings spread over a vast territory. And we can see here the Low Countries, where we see a lot of castles spread from the south, from Artois, to the north, Medemblik in Holland. And all those castles, of course, needed upkeep. And because of their vast number and the large geography, that complicated matters. And here we only see castles, but the domain of the prince also entailed other buildings, other type of building. The next one, please. So here we see, just from the Duchy of Brabant, we see several types of buildings like residences, but also mint, watermills, even meat halls. All these types of buildings belonged to the domain of the prince. So administrative buildings, commercial buildings, and even industrial buildings. And to maintain these buildings in good state, next one, please, centralized building administrations were set up from the late Middle Ages, so the late 14th century. And here, on the left, we see this kind of simple organization for a single project where a local receiver or constable or bailiff or his lieutenants were responsible for the upkeep, and they had a local design and supervision team, and construction was all in one place. However, this turned out to be a difficult way of organizing it, because usually receivers, or at times receivers or constables, started unwarranted constructions or even neglected upkeep. And that's why a centralized building administration was established from the late 14th century with the audit office, the Chambre des Comptes, who supervised construction. And then there was a team of master craftsmen who were not responsible for a single project, but for all projects in the domain of the prince. And they supervised construction in the entire domain. And one of the first examples is here in France, next one please, where we have under Charles V, a new system where a visiteur général des œuvres royaux was appointed next to chief master craftsman from 1388 on, and Raymond du Temple was the first to hold the title of general master mason in the entire realm. This is a largely symbolical title because in practice supervision mostly concentrated, and the next one, on the immediate surroundings of Paris, so the Prévôté, Vicomté, where of course the largest projects were carried out. Simultaneously, the next one, the King's Works in England was transformed under Edward II, and it received a more centralized character. And it's unclear if there are direct exchanges between these two administrations. However, it is clear that the developments at the French court influenced at least the princes of royal blood, because soon afterwards, the Duc de Berry, but also the Duke of Burgundy, began to set up their own administrations with more or less success. And eventually that would, the centralized administration would be introduced also in the Low Countries. And from there, even you could say it was introduced by Charles V in Spain with the Junta de Obras y Bosques in the early 16th century. The next one, please. So we have this kind of this spread of these institutions, and of course I'm talking about centralized, but we have to, especially for the Low Countries, that was an assembly of different territories. We have to understand that there's centralization within each of the counties or the duchies. And here we see Flanders, which long remained decentralized, but that changed in the early 16th century. And for instance, here we have an itinerary of the Receiver General. So also these administrations differed per territory, but here was not the Chambre des Comptes directly, but it was Receiver General who did inspections. And we see that in 1519, he made an inspection round of all dominial buildings. And next one, we see that he started in near Kortrijk in Menen, and then from there on, he visited the four quarters, so the four administrative entities of the territory in 22 days. And from there, next one, please, to the south, to west. And he did it together with the master craftsmen of each of these quarters. And together they covered the total distance, including the traffic from Bruges and back, of more than 650 kilometers, which is an astonishing 29 kilometers per day on average. And they surveyed over 50 structures, including bridges, castles, mills, manors, storehouses, mints, locks, and dikes. So it's a lot more than just simply the residence. It's almost every type of building you can imagine. And for each of them, repairs were specified and cost estimates were provided. And the team submitted the report to the auditors in Lille, so the Chambre des Comptes, who carefully examined every entry and added budgetary suggestions and approved of the proposed repairs in the margins. Such inspection trips, next one. Oh, yes, so yeah. Resulted often in reports that were usually accompanied with plans for repairs, which included written specifications and drawings. An example of a relatively large maintenance undertaking is the report for the roof structure of the Great Hall of Vilvoorde Castle, which was built in the fourth quarter of the 14th century, and it more or less followed the topology of the Bastille, and was the largest medieval castle of the Duchy of Brabant. It was not used as a residence, but it served as a prison and a treasury mainly, and it was of course an important fortress. And in the 18th century, in the 18th century, the Great Hall, this roof structure was in such a bad condition that the entire structure had to be replaced. The report that we see here with the drawings mentions that it was on the brink of collapse, and if the beams would come down, it argued they could damage the vaults of the cellars below the hall, which would be very expensive to repair. Furthermore, if the roof structure was reassembled, some beams could still be reused. Also, the towers of the 3 towers were beyond repair and were taken down, and they were not re-erected. And actually, we can see in the upper middle, we see an image of the early 18th century and see in what state it is. So apparently, these repairs were not carried out or were in vain, because we see a completely ruined castle. And it was also specified that the contractor had to take down the old roof structure without damaging the existing walls. And in addition, he was to demolish the damaged parapet and the stone lucarne in order to create a stable support for his wall plate. And wall work should follow the drawing, as we see here. All the roof tiles and pieces of slate from the old roof were to be stored in the storeroom of the prince. And it was an tender for the entire job, as it included the carpentry and laying of slate. The report reveals, because it's not an exceptional report, this is a kind of common report, it reveals a rationalization of maintenance procedures, which is a development that started in the late Middle Ages, and in Brabant, a new great continuity up to the end of the Ancien Regime. The procedures developed in the 15th and 16th century still determine much of the 18th century practice. While architectural history has often concentrated on the erection of new buildings, studying the people and processes involved in maintenance raises new questions and is also likely to provide a vital new and more comprehensive understanding of construction. We're therefore very much looking forward to exchange of thoughts and on this relatively disregarded theme in the coming 2 days and a half. And with that, I pass on the word.
Yes. Ce colloque donc se veut donc être la suite logique à celui qui a eu lieu à Utrecht il y a 2 ans. Et le choix de la thématique principale, l'entretien, vise à s'interroger sur ce qui se passe après la construction. Lorsque débute le temps de l'usage, de l'usure même, des sites royaux par le temps, les éléments, les détériorations, la vie quotidienne de la cour, du roi et de ceux qui l'entourent. De multiples actions sont alors nécessaires pour entretenir, réparer ces lieux de manière ordinaire ou extraordinaire, tout cela en ayant pour but de maintenir en état des sites royaux, l'entretien étant la clé à ce moment-là pour assurer la continuité dans le temps de la démonstration de la magnificence. Or, l'entretien, s'il est pourtant fondamental, n'est que finalement l'envers de la médaille, dont le prince présente volontiers beaucoup plus des éléments de construction, comme ici à Versailles, des éléments de réception de bâtiments terminés, je pense notamment aux Invalides par exemple, pour rester sur des exemples français, que des exemples, cette fois-ci, d'entretien, où j'avoue, on a eu un petit peu de mal à trouver ne serait-ce que l'illustration du carton du programme. Car les jardiniers sont bel et bien ceux que l'on voit le plus entretenir les résidences royales. C'est pourquoi nous avons délibérément choisi de nous focaliser sur l'entretien à l'époque moderne et en somme de tenter de faire une histoire de l'invisible. Alors avant de poursuivre, il convient de dire que le sujet que nous nous proposons d'aborder dans ce colloque n'est pas terra incognita. Historiens de l'art, historiens des sciences et des techniques, archéologues ont souvent abordé l'entretien d'une manière ou d'une autre au sein de leurs recherches qui portent le plus souvent sur l'histoire et ou l'évolution de tel ou tel site royaux, sur l'histoire des pratiques sur les chantiers ou sur celle des institutions qui avaient la charge de la construction et de la maintenance de ces espaces. Mais l'entretien a rarement été l'objet, en tout cas un sujet en soi, pour ce qui est de l'époque moderne. En effet, au sein de l'historiographie consacrée à ce sujet, l'entretien a bénéficié d'un éclairage plus important pour ce qui est de l'Antiquité et de la première partie du Moyen-Âge. Je pense entre autres à une session du 6e International Congress of Construction History tenue à Bruxelles en 2018, session qui avait pour thématique Building Maintenance in Ancient Times, up to the early modern period, session dirigée par Philippe Bernardi, Charles Davoine, Hélène de Salle et Maxime Lhéritier. L'entretien à l'époque contemporaine a quant à lui fait l'objet d'études et d'analyses, dont certaines d'ailleurs sont en cours. Je pense là, par exemple, à une thèse de doctorat par Yehudi Morgana à l'université Paris 1 Sorbonne, sous la direction de Valérie Nègre, thèse qui s'intitule « Maintenance Nightmare, histoire de l'entretien des édifices, 19e-20e siècle ». Ce colloque va donc avoir pour but de présenter des études sur l'entretien, études émanant de domaines de recherche interdisciplinaires, et ce sur une longue durée, qui va donc du XIVe siècle, lorsque naissent les sites royaux tels qu'on les connaît à l'époque moderne et que naissent les institutions qui vont les gérer, jusqu'au XIXe siècle, lorsque les lieux et les espaces royaux ont commencé à être transformés pour beaucoup, pas tous, mais pour beaucoup, en patrimoine national, et qu'en conséquence, l'accent a été mis non plus sur l'entretien et les réparations, mais sur la conservation et les restaurations. Comment l'entretien des sites royaux était-il conceptualisé, réalisé et financé entre le XIVe et le XIXe siècle? Par qui et selon quelles modalités? Peut-on percevoir des évolutions au travers des époques et des différentes aires géographiques européennes? Enfin, quelle place l'entretien avait-il dans les politiques somptuaires des princes en Europe à l'époque moderne? Voici donc les grandes questions qui vont se poser, et bien d'autres d'ailleurs vont venir alimenter cette réflexion. Alors, dans une volonté, je l'ai déjà dit, comparative, internationale, avec surtout une vision beaucoup plus large de l'espace étudié. Et à ce propos, je laisse la parole à Eloy pour vous en parler.
Merci, Benjamin. The origin of all these ideas started from the concept of royal site or royal geography, because if you realize, when we were speaking about the conference at Utrecht a couple of years ago, we were talking about royal sites, but here in the title, we are talking about royal geographies, no? So which one is the difference? Why we have changed in this couple of years? And that means it's related with the scope of time, no? Because of the concept that we are working with, related with royal site, must be something related with the court system, court political system, that belong from the 14th to the 18th century. But these royal geographies have a broader scope, we have said, in time. And it started because, at least in Spain, in other countries, I think it's the same, we always consider these places just like the royal residences. When we are thinking about royal sites, we are thinking just in the palaces, in the residences. Most of the people, not now anymore, but a couple of decades before, we're always thinking about these places that were, like I say there, more than just the curious residences, no, of royal families who live isolated from society. This idea, of course, at the Spanish case, but there are others, are related with writers and historians of the 19th century. The 19th century is the end of this idea of royal geography, while royal site for us is from the 14th to the 18th century. I will explain that in my own intervention after, no, at midday. So we could find a couple of decades ago a lot of really relevant studies about the royal buildings, of course, the royal hunt, the urbanism, or some particular aspects, especially related with history of art. But in reality, we guess, that's why we are doing this, that we need to think in a global way, like a global concept, like the royal geography, this idea of royal geography. Next one, please. Here, for example, I have just one of the billion examples we can find, no? I really like this kind of pictures from the decade of the archdukes, for the age of the archdukes in the Habsburg Netherlands, because if you realize in that moment, they not just show the building, no? Maremont, in this case, 1612. If not, the whole domain. I think in French, we are going to see after, they have a better word than the one we have in the different languages, no? So one of the other ideas about doing this this conference, talking about different aspects, were related with language. It's not the same sitio real in Spanish, please. The next one, please. In Spain, you say sitio real, everybody know what are we talking about, because still we call that sitio real. But they just think in the Palace of Aranjuez, Monastery of San Lorenzo del Escorial, El Pardo, and so on. They don't realize that still we have many other types of buildings that I will explain this evening, and they were part of these royal geographies. No? In the United Kingdom and Anglo-Saxon world, I have spoken several times with English colleagues. If you talk about royal site, it's a concept that they don't really understand properly. What are we talking about? No, especially, for example, because they are related with the 6 royal sites of the ancient Ireland. No, if you look for royal site in these databases in England, you always find this. No, the idea of resident or court residence is well known, and especially because the Palatium network, directed by Krista de Jong, is gently with us here. This idea has been really well studied, but there are many other places, many other royal geographies that are not related with this. In Germany, the idea of residence, of course, is really well studied, the Germanic world. In France, they use the word domain. For example, yesterday I saw at the library, I have checked it before, one great book about from Vincent Magotot, talking about the domain of Versailles. That book is great in that sense, because it's talking not just about the building or the different buildings or constructions, enough about the whole domain, for example. No? And in the Netherlands, they use something similar. Merlijn, for example, has explained before about the domanial there in the Netherlands, no? In the Habsburg Netherlands. Next one, please. So this is the difference. Why, when we speak about royal site or when we speak about royal geography, of course, still exists the idea of royal site, but when we are talking about royal site, we are talking about these royal geographies from the 14th to the 18th century, related with the court system. I repeat again, I will explain this deeper after. So in the 19th century, like Benjamin has said, in most of the countries of Europe, especially, they changed from royal places into national heritage sites. So they changed completely the meaning of them. And more or less our definition in this moment, because the idea of this conference, of course, is to work much more on this, there are properties that belong to the ruling dynasty, where the ruler and other members of the family resided or occasionally occupied, or other forms associated with the running of the monarchy, its court, and its economy, including royal convents and monasteries. For example, you know that one of the events of the conference, the last one of the conference, the presentation of a book related with royal sites and spirituality, the different Spanish kingdoms in early modern moment, and of course is related with all this. Next one, please. Well, so in this sense, the term geography is really a broader idea. No? The royal geography manifests our interest, that you have the definitions, in the way that physically spaces and landscapes was acted upon and produced through cultural practices. This interrelation of physical and human agency is naturally ranking and encompasses image making, architectural, agricultural, and administrative processes. So we are talking about much more than history of art, much more history of architecture, much more about history of ideas. That is this global concept. That's why in the call for papers, we are going to speak about the call for papers in a moment, we gave some questions, and these questions were related with all these aspects we can find here. So we had forests, we had gardens, we had agricultural spaces, factories, art collections, libraries and archives, laboratories, and so on. So I repeat again, our idea is this of the global concept. And in the call for papers, if you have a look to the program of this conference, for example, we have the different questions, the research stems and questions that we put in that call for papers. No? For example, the first one is concepts and designs. We put on the floor several questions, for example, the definition. No? If the maintenance has been theorized before or not, in the same way like construction or building or not. The representation, for example, no? The temporality, and for example, technology, nobody replied, no? We were speaking yesterday about that. So still we have a long path to go, no? So we will say that at the end of the conference. And in this first concept and designs session, this morning we have Jorge Fernandez Santos, for example, Jonathan Spangler, Gijs Verstegen, myself, Merlijn Horks, and Ana Victoria Burnat, and Milton Pedro Diaz Pacheco. They are going to speak about institutions and people. At Utrecht, we studied the institutions, directly the institutions that build the presence of the prince, the Junta de Bras y Bosques, the King's Works, for example, and so on. We are working on the volume right now, and it's really interesting. And I'm sure that the continuation of this conference will be the same. No? In this institution and people, we pose some questions like managing the upkeep, the life of these institutions, because these institutions that we spoke in Utrecht about change, of course, not the sense. For example, just one brief thing, if you realize, in the 14th, 15th, 16th century, these institutions have at the forefront one of the most relevant architects, for example, of every kingdom of the moment. That doesn't happen, for example, after the 19th century. Not the best architects, for example, are now in Patrimonio Nacional, for example, no? That changed the idea of these institutions. The officers and contractors, Merlijn has spoken about that. Of course, there's a lot of difference between the 14th century and the way that they work in that moment in the Habsburg Netherlands or in the 18th century in France, for example. So we have two sessions related with institutions and people today, and tomorrow, Thursday, we have Nuno Senos as well, Hervé Mouillebush, Erin Gladgraf, Ronan Boutier finally not with us, not join us, okay, and Cordula Bauer, Gabriela Lamy, Francesca Capano. And at the end of the day, we have another session related with finances, with finance, no? The cost. Which ones were the costs? Who paid for that? No, who paid the bill? No? It's really important, of course, know how to manage that. No, it's not the same whether it belonged to the king or it belonged to the national heritage sites or whatever institutions. No, and of course depend on the country. The choice to stop maintaining that is really relevant as well. Is because we don't have money, or because we want to finish with something, or we want to finish with a symbol of any former king, any former dynasty. We keep going with the same dynasty, for example. These are the ideas that we want to transmit, okay? And in finances, we have Isabel Hensolin, Lilian Brandt, for example. And in the last day, we have Christopher Smith and Felix Labrador Arroyo. So we guess that this conference will answer some of these questions, but of course, still we need more time to keep going with them. Okay, so Benjamin. These are the types of royal geographies that we will explain in detail in my conference.
Alors, au terme de cette introduction et avant de poursuivre, il nous semble important de rappeler quelques éléments pratiques concernant ce colloque. Vous dire tout d'abord, et vous l'avez bien compris, c'est une conférence hybride et nous sommes désolés de tout l'attirail que nous avons dû placer, ne serait-ce que devant vous. Voilà, mais je pense que d'avoir la possibilité d'être sur site aujourd'hui ici à Versailles, mais aussi en ligne, offre plus de possibilités qu'auparavant. Et c'est vrai qu'au centre de recherche, nous sommes très heureux de pouvoir ainsi apporter cette possibilité de colloque hybride qui à la fois va nous permettre pendant ces 3 jours d'avoir des interventions ici à Versailles, en ligne également. Et ainsi, ça nous a permis de conserver un programme entier, complet. Donc c'est une vraie solution qui est certainement un des seuls aspects positifs de la crise sanitaire qui nous frappe depuis 2 ans. Et c'est vrai que de multiplier ainsi les modes d'intervention et les modes d'assistance, puisque nous avons donc du public ici à l'auditorium du château et du public en ligne à la fois sur Zoom et sur YouTube, que nous saluons. Évidemment, c'est je dirais, des possibilités bien plus grandes qu'auparavant. Eloy les a présentées. Ces 3 journées seront structurées par des sessions thématiques au sein desquelles s'enchaîneront les présentations. Pour ce qui est plus particulièrement du temps de parole, je suis désolé d'être aussi précis et matériel, mais nous allons donc avoir des présentations de 20 minutes, suivies de 10 minutes de questions. La possibilité à chaque fois, à la fin de chaque intervention, pour les intervenants, pour les participants, pour le public, ici même ou en ligne, de poser des questions. Avoir aussi à l'esprit que les questions et les commentaires qui nous sont adressés via Zoom et YouTube seront adressés aux participants par les présidents et présidentes de séance. Et enfin, je suis désolé, mais si le temps de parole, de présentation dépasse les 20 minutes, le temps pour les questions devra être réduit d'autant et on ne pourra pas dépasser 30 minutes en tout. Ce n'est pas une volonté de notre part d'être trop dur, mais de nous garder la possibilité d'avoir un programme qui reste dans les temps et aussi, étant donné que nous avons du public et des intervenants en ligne, que chacun puisse nous rejoindre à l'heure précise où il doit être avec nous. Des remerciements. Parce que, avant de commencer la première session, nous tenons et je tiens tout particulièrement à adresser mes plus vifs remerciements et en premier au Centre de recherche du Château de Versailles, son directeur, Alexandre Maral, et son directeur scientifique, Mathieu Davina, qui, depuis le début de ce projet, ont soutenu ce colloque activement et n'ont pas hésité à un instant à lui donner tous les moyens, tant humains que financiers, pour qu'il puisse voir le jour, et ce, dans d'excellentes conditions. Qu'ils en soient remerciés ardemment. Nous tenons aussi à remercier vivement Mesdames Olivia Lombardi, Delphine Desbourdes-Morin, pour toute l'assistance et l'aide qu'elles ont pu apporter à l'organisation et à la préparation logistique de ces 3 jours et de me supporter aussi, dans les 2 sens du terme. Aidée, et je tiens à la saluer, par Madame Sandrine Jonot, qui leur prête main forte. Enfin, nous remercions chaleureusement Mademoiselle Jeanne Fleury, qui a accepté de gérer la partie en ligne du colloque, qui n'est pas une mince affaire, nous permettant donc le déploiement de tout le dispositif de diffusion en direct via Zoom et notre chaîne YouTube. Ces remerciements versaillais seraient incomplets si nous ne saluons pas M. Christian Millet, régisseur de l'auditorium du Château de Versailles et maillon indéfectible de la réussite de nos colloques et journée d'études du Centre de recherche depuis de nombreuses années. Je tiens vraiment à le remercier pour cela. Nous souhaitons aussi remercier les membres du comité scientifique du colloque, dont voici les noms qui apparaissent. Merci infiniment à eux pour le soutien qu'ils ont très rapidement apporté au projet. Enfin, nous tenons à remercier très chaleureusement tous les participants au colloque, qu'ils soient ici, présents ou en ligne. Un grand merci aussi à ceux parmi vous qui ont accepté de nous accompagner dans le rôle de président de séance, Christa De Jong, merci infiniment, et Mathieu Davina, merci également pour cette participation au colloque.